Oh Mario, Luka ta mwasi yo moko bala. Mario mosalo be kolinga ba mama mobokoli. Basuka yo te. Ah.
Hi guys, I'm back today and today's video is going to be, let's call it a sort of catch-up series of video that I'm doing because I received lots of messages from my non-French speaking subscribers or English speaking subscribers asking me to do all these videos of artists in essentially all the content that I do in English as well. So to be fair, when I started doing that type of content, it was just from the top of my head. I just had the thought, why not doing it? And I've done it about Franco. So that was the very first video that I've done in the series of Story of Artists. And it's only when I started to receive so many positive comments about this video and all the one that followed that I started to think about doing them in English. But at first, essentially, I was just like, well, why not doing those videos? But then I started to have lots of messages from you and I keep receiving those messages. And because I'm going to do many more videos going forward about other artists that are connected to Franco, Tabu Ley Rochereau, Sam Mangwana, it's only fair that I do these videos in English for you guys to understand as much as the French-speaking community. And for me, it's also important because the way you've been asking me, I do realise, and I didn't realise when I started, but I do realise how many of you are eager to hear more about the story of African modern music, because I appreciate that we listen to music nowadays, but we don't always know the roots of it. And African modern music history is quite modern. It's essentially quite modern and very new. And that's why I'm doing so much content on this. It's taking me lots of time researching about this, but it's really important for me because it's part of my culture and I'm aware that it's part of many of you's culture as well. So I'm starting to do that series of videos. It's not going to have essentially a name. I'm just going to throw the content over to you. But I really hope that you will enjoy it. Feel free as well to let me know in the comment if you've got any other artists that you'd like me to talk about. I've got a long list, but I'm always happy to know the type of content that you like to do. To be fair, sometimes when I see the views on some of the videos that I do in English and then I see the one in French, I'm like, it took me like 2 weeks and a half to work on that video and I'm only getting 500 views on this. But I don't do it for the views, I do it because if it can reach out 100 of you guys and you've learned about something, that's my job done. Essentially, it's just my job done. So I do hope though that the English speaking community is going to grow as much as the French one, because I can see where you're from, and to be fair, it's pretty amazing for me because I'm here in the UK and knowing that there's people from Kenya, there's people from Uganda, from Ghana, Nigeria, South America, lots of people from Brazil, Argentina. I'm really happy about this. So yeah, I'm just going to keep on doing this content for you guys. It's taking me a while because whatever I do in French, essentially it's taking me less time because French is my mother tongue. So naturally it's going to be faster for me to do those things. Even when I put like the interviews, I can't remember who it was, but I know it was one of you who said, oh, when you put whatever interview content within the video, can you put the subtitles? And sometimes I don't even think about it because it's my mother tongue. So whatever I do in English is always taking me more time. But I want to take the time to do it because I think that it's really, really important. And I haven't seen many channels doing that. So if I can do it in French and in English, I'll do it. I'm not going to go into doing it in Portuguese as well. I could, but I'm not going to because it's just going to be time consuming. But for you guys, I'm ready to catch up on all this content. So for the next couple of weeks, all the videos are going to be in English, for you, and I really hope you're gonna enjoy the content and share it with as many people as you'd like to, because we're all gonna learn from it. I learn as well, because sometimes you all also giving me like extra information about these artists that I do know about. But yeah, that's me done talking, waffling around, talking about my life. I hope that you're now ready to enjoy the inspiring and exceptionally important story of one of African modern music pioneer, because you're going to understand when you're going to hear his story how much we owe to this man in terms of music. So I do hope you're ready to enjoy the story of Franco Luambo Makiadi. Off we go. Talking about Franco and his story is essentially going back to the roots of innovation and avant-garde, because that man didn't create rumba. We're going to see that in a second, because he's not the creator of Congolese rumba, but he's been the person who so cleverly managed to create a connection between the tradition of African music that was at the time not just booming, but that was being created, blossoming from the roots of different music influences. And he managed to actually connect that with what people on their daily life were experiencing. And that's why this man and his legacy is so important. So, before we actually start talking about his life, because he was born on the 6th of July 1938, but at this time there were so many important things happening in Congo in terms of music. So before we actually talk about him and how he evolved and how he grew up, I'm just gonna go back in time and tell you a little bit more about the musical context at the time, because it's essential that you understand how Congolese rumba was created and emerged in a very specific time in Africa for African people and for the independence of African countries as well.
Independance, cha-cha, tozumiye, oti kwanza, cha-cha, tobakidi, otableron, cha-cha, baganyeo, onipanda, cha-cha, tozumiye.
So only a few years after he was born in 1938, many things were happening at the time, and essentially at the end of the Second World War, you have to know that in Africa, lots of military men from Cuba and from America were on the African coast, on the West African coast, and when they arrived, just the way they brought jeans and chewing gum in Europe, they brought music with them. And because you had people from Cuba and you had people from America, naturally they brought their music. They brought jazz and they brought Cuban music. They brought salsa. They brought Cuban rumba as well. And it's essential to remember that they brought Cuban rumba as well, because it is with those two music genres that the actual Congolese rumba is going to be created. When those military forces arrived in the west coast of Africa, you also have to note that at this time, whether it was in Congo, but in other African countries, music, the only music that was legally allowed on the street or on the radio was European music. So in the Belgian Congo at the time, it was European music essentially that was allowed over there. But in 1938, both in Congo from Brazzaville and in Congo from Kinshasa, there was sort of a music revolution. And what they decided to do because African people were not allowed to create their music, especially having music with their own mother tongue. So essentially people were not allowed to do song in Lingala or in Kikongo or in Chibula. So what happened is that in 1938 they decided, both in Congo Kinshasa and Congo Brazzaville, to sort of do a radio revolution and launch 2 radio stations at the exact same time, actually 2 months after the other. So they've created Radio Brazzaville and Radio Congo Belge. And when those 2 radio stations were created, the purpose was to essentially have music in African languages. So it was either in Lingala, it was in Kikongo, whatever languages they wanted to use, but they really wanted to be able to do this song in their mother tongue because it was illegal, but they just started to think, why could we not have our own music in our own languages for our people as well? So that's what they've done. So in 1943, that's the very first time on the radio that you could listen to music that was essentially non-European influenced music. The song Marie-Louise from Wendo Kolosoi is actually the very first song ever recorded in Lingala using Congolese and Bantu rhythm and Cuban rumba. And it is key to remember this because someone very, very specific at this time in Congo had a dream. I'm going to make a video after I finish all this series. I'm going to catch up and start doing all these videos again in French and in English. But a specific man decided that he had a dream, and that dream was to be as good as a very famous jazz musician. And you probably know him if you're my age. I'm 28, so maybe you know this artist as well, Louis Armstrong.
I see trees of green. I see them blue for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
He was a very famous trumpet artist and singer, and the artist that I'm going to talk about had a very strong admiration for him. This artist is called Grand Kalle, that's his nickname. So if you type Grand Kalle, you're going to find his name. But his real name was Joseph Cabasele. And this artist decided to use those Cuban jazzy influences as well as African languages, merge them together with the traditional Bantu culture rhythm and create something new, something completely new. And what he did is not only did he created a new sound, he created his band, and that band is called African Jazz. I'm not going to go into any more details, but African Jazz is the actual group that essentially brought to life the modern Congolese Rumba as such. So they not only created that out of the blue, they've created this for a very, very specific historical moment for African people. And that moment is the independence of Congo. So on the 13th of June, I really always have a hard time saying this number, 30th of June 1960, is the official date of the independence of Kinshasa, Congo from Kinshasa. And when it was officially announced, obviously that was an incredible news for everyone. So everyone wanted to celebrate. African people, any moment we have to celebrate something, we do it. Essentially, that time was just party time for the country. And what happened is that 6 months before the official announcement of the independence, they knew that it would be officially announced in Belgium. So what they did is that they've created a song that is not only in French, that song is actually in Kikongo, in Lingala, and in Chiluba. So 3 of the languages spoken in Congo from Kinshasa. They've made that song. They've created that song that was essentially merging all the different rhythm from Congo with the jazz music, with Cuban salsa as well, and essentially deeply rooted with Cuban rumba. So they've created that very specific song that was launched for the independence, and that music is now known by pretty much everyone in Africa. It is called Independance Cha-Cha. And that song is probably, I would say, the very first international, transcontinental and international success of Congolese Rumba. So when that song was created, African jazz became the real, the roots, essentially the foundation of what Congolese modern music was. But obviously, this story is not about African jazz, it's not about Grand Kalle, it's about Franco. But I'm explaining all of this because the African jazz band became the reference for any type of music at this time in Congo, but in Africa and in the region of Central Africa, generally speaking. And it's essential to remember this because the success of Independance Cha-Cha and all the song that African jazz is going to be doing after this one is just going to be the baseline and the root for any sort of music for, I'd say, a good 10 years. That rhythm, that new genre that they've created was the root of Congolese music at this time. But the men we're going to talk about used this new rhythm extremely cleverly and made something completely different out of it. So he grew up within this context. So now that we know a little bit more about what was going on in terms of music at the time, let's switch all the way to the very beginning of Franco's life. So as I was telling you, Franco was born in 1938. So the very beginning of his life essentially was at the time when, in this musical context, modern Congolese rumba was created by the pioneer Grand Kalle. And unfortunately, his dad passed away when he was really, really young. And his mom essentially really wanted him to do studies, to go to school, to do studies. So she had this dream for her son, essentially, that would be essentially do studies, find a very good job, and all of this dream and ideal of society in her mind that she had for her son. But when Franco was only 7 years old, try to remember what you guys were doing when you were 7 years old. Essentially, when I was 7 years old, I don't know, what was I doing? I was probably trying to pinch my sister's little dolls, and actually I was probably dreaming of becoming a superstar, because that was my dream when I was 5. I was telling everyone I was just going to be an amazing, incredible star without much more around it, but that was my dream. But Franco had a very specific dream, and I would say a vision for his life. And what he had in mind was something that he always grabbed and he never gave up on it, essentially. When he was 7 years old, he created his very first guitar, and he learned how to play the guitar by himself when he was 7 years old. And not only did he create his own guitar and starting to play the guitar by himself, but he made very clear, he told his mom, I'm not going to be doing any studies. Right, when he was 7 years old, obviously he had to go to school. But growing up, and essentially, actually 7 years later, no, 8 years after that, he actually told his mom, I'm not going to go to school anymore. So he was 15 years old and he said, I'm going to be an artist. I'm going to be a musician. That's what I want to do. That's what I'm going to do. So he had this clear idea in his mind about his future, about his, I would say, destiny in a sense as well, because he always made very clear throughout his life that he was extremely proud, because he stopped going to school very young. He was extremely proud of the fact that he gave up on going to school, but that never stopped him from achieving things in his life. And that was a very important message that he wanted to pass through as well. If you've got a destiny, if you've got something that you think is essentially in your soul, part of you, just hold on to that. And that's what he did. And he was very, very proud of the fact that he became essentially a music leader, not only for his band, but for the community in Congo, in Central African region, and for Africa generally speaking. So at the very young age of 7 years old, he already had the very, very clear idea of what his future would be, and of the fact that he would become the artist that he's been for the world. And because he always made so clear that he was not defined by the fact that he would have done studies, that he would have followed the ideal path to success, he always made himself extremely proud of the fact that he learned things by himself. And there's something extremely important about Franco, because when we listen to his song, sometimes people think that he's a singer or that he's just the face of Tout Puissant OK Jazz, but essentially he is a musician at heart, and not just a musician, he is a guitar player and an extremely talented genius guitar player. Now I'm going to put a little extra of music now. You can hear someone's voice. It's actually the voice of Sam Mangwana, another artist that I'm going to talk about on another video. But when you hear Sam Mangwana talking, he's going to say le sorcier de la guitare, which means the guitar wizard. And it is really a way to show you how much he had talent, not only to write songs, to sing as well, but also for the guitar. That was really, really at the root of the genius and the powerful influence of Franco.
Ouais, ça c'est lui-même, le grand maître, sorcier de la guitare. Yeah, c'est ça. Ah ah. On dirait que tu tiens ça avec OK Jazz. Roca. C'est fort, hein?
obviously, even if he's a self-made man, essentially, from rag to riches stories, he got help. He got help when he was trying to master the art of music, the art of guitar, playing the guitar. And he actually got help from a very specific person, which is called Luambo, who is an artist from Congo. And this artist is really, really going to be here to sort of mentor him and talk him through different technical way of master the use of the guitar and really give some fineness to his actual art. And he really said himself that he owed a lot to the artist, because even if obviously he had this talent, this raw talent, it is with the help of Luambo that progressively he managed to master the art of being an incredibly good guitar player. And you also have to remember that everything I'm saying now, he was extremely young. So he decided to stop going to school when he was 15 years old. And when he met Luambo, he was only 18 years old. So he was still extremely young, 10 years younger than me, essentially. So it is really, really at this time that not only will he start to master the art of playing the guitar, but also that he's going to develop his leadership, because this man was not only an incredible artist, but he was a leader at heart. So at the age of 18 years old, he's going to create his very first band with a couple of other artists. And again, there was still the influence of Luambo at this time. So his very first band was called Watam, which means essentially sort of outlaw, because he wasn't really going to school anymore. He was more like hanging out in the streets and a bit of anti-social behavior as well. But so that was the name of his very first band with a couple of artists and the support of Luambo. And after this group is going to merge with another group of artists at the time that was playing in Kinshasa, and that group was called Madilu. But it's not that group, obviously, that's going to remain in history. It is another group. So we're going to go a little bit more in details about the story and creation of one of the most important bands in the history of African music, le Tout Puissant OK Jazz. So it is in 1956 that after creating this first band called Watam and then merging with this band called Madilu, that Franco, as well as a couple of other artists, are going to merge together and create what is now called le Tout Puissant OK Jazz. But you need to keep in mind that before being called Tout Puissant OK Jazz, which means the most powerful OK Jazz band, essentially most powerful or most overwhelmingly powerful band, essentially, that's what it means. Before being that band, this was called OK Jazz, and it was called like this in reference to a bar that was called OK Jazz when they used to perform a lot. So then when they sort of become this really, really influential group in the city, in the country, and then in the continent, they've changed their name to be called le Tout Puissant OK Jazz, the ultimately powerful OK Jazz. So when the band was created, remember, at this time, there was still the overwhelming influence of African jazz, which had really, really famous artists in that band, including Tabu Ley Rochereau, who started his career with Kalle in the African jazz band. So there was this overwhelming presence and rhythm of African jazz. But when he created that band with other musicians, what happened is that very quickly he took the lead. He really, really took the lead. That's why people think that he's the creator of Congolese Rumba, that he's the creator of Tout Puissant OK Jazz as well, when he's only one of the co-founder of this band, but because he took so much lead on it very quickly and very naturally, it started to spread away all the other musicians that were involved, and he became the face and the voice of Tout Puissant OK Jazz. But it's really, really important for me to emphasize that he's not the only creator of that band, and that many artists went to his band, and it is because they also went to that band that this group boomed so much and became what it is. Essentially, he is, I would say, the most important artist of that band, obviously, but other artists really brought the influence to making what Tout Puissant OK Jazz has been and still is for the legacy of African music. Remember that this band was created in 1956, but very quickly, because of the success of the first song of the band, many artists that were actually in the band African Jazz with Kalle, remember Independance, Cha-Cha, all of this music, Parafifi, all of that, they started to move away from that band and actually knock on the door at the Tout Puissant OK Jazz to work with Franco, because that's where the success was, basically. That's where not just the success, but the curiosity was. Because remember that when African jazz started to be a thing in Africa, it was still something very, let's say, traditional. But what Franco did and the influence that he had essentially did something different, because he started to talk about different topics. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in details in a few minutes, but the topics that he was mentioning were really, really something that people were starting to relate to. So essentially, some of the musicians that were working with Kalle sort of left the tradition more conservative because it was new. It was the bass. Remember, when something is the bass, naturally it becomes sort of the set in stone, and if you're moving this a little bit, you're shaking what's sort of conservative. So that's what happened. Many artists left the African jazz band to go toward this curiosity, this modernity. At the time it was extremely modern. Now we think it's our parents' music, but at the time, I'm telling you, this was the highest top of modernity. So they all sort of going into this more modern music, essentially, that was just bringing a lot of curiosity for the public, but also for the artists that were going in that band. And it's really important for me to mention that there were lots of different artists that also brought their own music style, their own influence to Tout Puissant OK Jazz, but other artists also went to Tout Puissant OK Jazz, and it is when they went to that band that they became famous. I can quote a couple of them. So if you listen to the song Mario, which is probably one of the most famous songs of Franco and Tout Puissant OK Jazz. It's not only him who's singing. You've got Madilu System, that's his voice. So you've got Madilu, you've got Sam Mangwana, that I'm going to do the video of. Who else? You've got Verkys, who was both a musician but also a singer, extremely famous. Tabu Ley Rochereau, remember, he started off at the African Jazz Band, but then he also worked really, really closely with Franco. He didn't stay very long in the Tout Puissant OK Jazz because he created his own band called Afriza International, but he did work with this band.
ozalaka kaka moto léger entourage salaka mabe olinyo.
And there's another artist that I want to mention, an artist, a poet, who is one of the most important person in that band, and it is Simaro Lutumba. Simaro was, let's say, the second man of Franco. So he was the mastering all the different repetition that they were doing. He was the leader for this, and he is someone extremely important. We always remember Franco, but it's also, for me, very important that people do remember the name of Simaro Lutumba, because this man really brought lots of legacy to the band. And he actually talks about it himself. Just going to put the extract right here.
Musician and former vice president of the band, believes that the Latin influence inspired new and innovative styles.
Dans l'OK Jazz, il y a eu un moment où le cha-cha-cha était ici. Alors, nous avons fabriqué une langue qui n'existait pas.
So even if Franco remained the actual boss of Tout Puissant OK Jazz, Simaro Lutumba was the one who was doing all the repetition with all the different artists. Whenever there was something to change, he was the one doing the changes, and then he would just go to Franco and saying, we've done this and this and that. And Franco trusted him a lot in all of these changes, in sort of training the new musician as well. So he's someone extremely important in terms of what the Tout Puissant OK Jazz has been. So after the first successes that Tout Puissant OK Jazz and Franco are going to start to have, essentially the music that they're going to create, because they're going to use what was the root of it, what was created by African jazz, but they've created something new, something people were connected to. This new legacy essentially became the aura of Congolese music at the time in the country for Congolese people, but also in Africa generally speaking, as well as internationally. So Franco, who became officially the CEO of Tout Puissant OK Jazz, because Tout Puissant OK Jazz became an actual organization, an actual company, he became this ambassador for Congolese Rumba, for Congolese culture internationally. And it is something really important, because until nowadays, this legacy is still present internationally in what we know of Congolese music. So Franco became the main ambassador of Congolese music, but also of the Bantu culture, because to be fair, that music was listened to in Congo, but it was listened to all over Africa and in the region of Central Africa. For example, I can say that personally, in my family, Congolese Rumba is listened to every day. Like literally every day, on my dad's side anyway. People listen to Congolese Rumba a lot. Any family gathering that we have, baptism, wedding, barbecue, birthday, or even just if my uncles are coming over to have a pint at my parents', there's going to be Congolese Rumba, because it is so rooted in the culture. It is really something that is essentially going through from generation after generation, because it is very much touching the heart of people from Africa, because it is talking about who they are essentially. And Franco has been this ambassador in Congo for Congolese people, but also for the Bantu culture, so for people from the region of Central Africa, and from people from Africa generally speaking, because I can't say how many times I've heard people saying, I don't understand a word of that music, but I just love it, and it sort of touched my heart, the rhythm just gets me. And it is essentially because it's sort of connecting to the African roots of that music. And Franco has been one of the main ambassadors of that music. They've been doing tour after tour after tour in Africa. I'm going to put a little extract of one of the music that they've done actually in Ivory Coast. But they've done tour not only in Ivory Coast, they've done it all over Africa. They've done it as well in Washington, and he had the chance to go to Washington and do a couple of concerts over there, meet the mayor of Washington at the time. And there's another thing that I've mentioned in a couple of videos, but when George Foreman performed in Zaire, at the time it was still called Zaire, he was there. He was one of the main artists that performed at the break time before Muhammad Ali and George Foreman performed. And he really was here to be this ambassador of Congo, of Congolese music and Congolese rumba. And when you see how the women, the dancers, the girls were dressed up, the way the hair was as well, you just see how much it was important as well for him. And he always made that very clear, how important it was to bring light and make this African music shine all over the world. And he did an extremely good job because everyone still listens to his music nowadays. And being this ambassador of Congolese music, of Congolese culture and the Bantu culture, essentially, I keep referring to the Bantu culture because if you're from Central African Republic, if you're from Congo, from Brazzaville, if you're from Congo, from Kinshasa, or if you're from Gabon or Cameroon, you would or Angola as well, even if they speak Portuguese, I can tell you how it's still connected. If you merge all these frontiers, the culture is the same. That's why I keep referring to the Bantu culture. But he's been an ambassador of this specific culture in a way that really touched the heart of people, because not only was he having songs, him and the artist, and I put him, Sam Mangwana, who was doing lots of songs in Kikongo for him. So he would be having song in Lingala, in Kikongo, and it was really, really important for him to shine about all of this, because it was essentially what people knew, what people were living in their daily life. And another way that he did it was through the actual lyrics of his song, because he sort of became this mirror of the society, the African society, and the evolution of the society at the time. So he would talk about women, sometimes being extremely critical as well towards women, because they would be more modern in his sense, which was in his view not a good thing. He would talk about different subjects. He would talk about politics, he would talk about the society, he would talk about sexuality as well. So many different subjects that he would mention, but always things that people could refer to naturally, because he was always talking about people's everyday life. And that's also how his influence and his power was so strong at the time in Congo and in Africa, generally speaking. So essentially in his song, he's going to be making observation, not always, he's going to be making observations about what society was at his time, but it wasn't always done in a very biased way. So for example, in the song Mamou, that I'm going to put right here, he's talking about a woman. Mamou means maman. It means, sorry, that's in French. It means mum. Sometimes I just go that way and go back to French. It means mum. But it's also in Africa a way of talking, referring to your wife. If you're a man and you're talking to your wife and you say maman, it's a way of saying darling or sweetheart. It's a sweet word basically to talk about your wife. So that song is called Mamou, and essentially it's the story of a man who's on the phone to his wife and he's saying, so where are you? Because he doesn't know where his wife is. So he's on the phone with her and he's saying, oh Mamou, so you know, my darling sweetheart, where are you? So he's going to ask her, she's going to reply, oh, I'm at home, you know, I'm just at home with the kids. But in reality, she's not at home with whatever kids they might be having. She is in a club with her friends. So this little observation of society, in his view, was to say how women were having an attitude that was not very conservative anymore, that they were taking a little bit too much liberties in his eyes, again, in his view. And he made other songs like this. He would have very harsh words towards women. And some people say, this is a rumor, I don't know if it is true, but that a woman called Majos would have actually broke his heart when he was younger, and he kept resentment toward women and toward that woman more specifically. And it is why sometimes in his song he would have really harsh words towards women. But he would not only talk about women. In the song Mario, which is one of the most famous songs, he's talking about men who are essentially being escort boy and being with rich older women just for their money.
Oh Mario, luka ta mwasi yo moko bala. Mario mosalo be kolinga ba mama mobokoli. Basuka yo te. Ah.
Lelo makambo lobi makambo na lembi lelo bitumba lobi kosona na baye na boyi ko bebi sanzoto na manzanga na lembi Mario na lembi.
So, you know, he would talk about many different subjects, and we're going to talk about another subject that he's mentioning later on in the video. But it is important for me to mention that because people at the time were really referring to this song as modernity, because all of a sudden there's someone who talks about what we do on our everyday life. We've got someone who's able to make us feel like, oh, I can sing on that song, yeah, I've done that yesterday. Just how we do it nowadays with song that we can listen to. We naturally can refer to whatever song we listen to because of the lyrics. But at this time, it was extremely new for the public in Congo or in Africa, generally speaking, and in the Bantu culture, to have those songs being direct references to their everyday life. Not only having this, because you could have that in the tradition, but having this in such a popular way, because this song was extremely popular. Remember, this song were in Lingala, in Kikongo, but it didn't really matter if you could understand the lyrics. Essentially, you would understand the intention of the song, and people would refer to this. So it is extremely powerful, and it is in that sense that he's been sort of observing society and made song out of it. And obviously, with all of that influence, he would have people who would absolutely adore him. He would have people being an absolute fan of him, fan of his music, fan of whatever he would be saying in his song, the way he would say it. But he would also have people who obviously hated him big time. He would really, really have people who couldn't stand him. Essentially, they couldn't stand him. But what he would do is that whenever he would have someone who would openly criticize him, he wouldn't just be like, all right, let's just, have a fight or something like that. He would essentially just reply to that person through a song. So what we see like in our current society, when rap artists or just sort of clashing each other in song, that's what he would do at the time. In the 70s, 80s, that's what he would be doing essentially. He would reply to people's criticism through a song, and he would always make sure that people knew that he was the boss because of how much power and influence he had. Because when you start to be when you start to have success the way he did have success, his influence and his power were known by everyone, and it would make some people essentially either trying to take advantage of this power and that influence, or very much jealous of whatever he could have.
Saiwa sope saiwa Bimana bala bala Banzana na bazono Ganga lokola kake Ona candidature maréchal Mobutu seko.
So remember when I was explaining that we went all the way from African jazz and this root of African music towards Tout Puissant OK Jazz and this modernity of music. Essentially, this created that space for him to throw messages about the society, about what people were doing, about the culture essentially. And obviously, with the independence, the fact that now people could have songs in Lingala, in Kikongo, in Chiluba, whatever languages they wanted to, it brought that space for influence. It created that space for influence and for power. Because as soon as your voice is heard, as soon as whatever you're going to be saying is not only going to be heard by the public, but is sometimes going to be perceived as the truth, that's essentially at this specific moment that politics came into place, because political figures at the time started to realize how much Franco had influence, how much people would listen to Franco and perceived whatever he would be saying as the truth. And it is exactly what a specific person is going to be doing. That person is Mobutu.
Tous à la sincère, tous à la franc. Hypocrisie, to boy. Ingratitude, to boy. Nani akoki kosunga ekolo. Soki Mobutu te nani mosusu. Mobutu seko.
So Mobutu essentially used this new space of influence through art, through music, to share his political ideas, and it really worked. It really, really did work. But at the same time, you also need to know that even if Mobutu might have thanked him with money and things like this, it didn't prevented him from putting Franco in prison a couple of years after, because Franco always remained very critic about the culture, about the society, and it also sometimes involved being very harsh about his politics and expressing his opinion and his view on the evolution of his own politic. So both Mobutu has been using him as a way to convey a message, to spread out his political view, his campaigns, but it also became sort of a double sword for Franco when he was being too critical. Mobutu had no problem just putting him in jail when he thought that was a little bit too much, you know. So it is also important to remember, because it was also new at the time to use politics in such a way to essentially promote political idea. But obviously the influence didn't stop to politics, and what has been always extremely clever is how he always used the different rhythm that he was gonna do, the different rhythm that he was gonna give to his music, to sort of shape the approach of his music towards the public, and always making sure that he remained extremely modern. And it was also something important, because obviously when you hear the song that he's starting to do at the very beginning of his career, obviously the rhythm is going to evolve as well, and it's also going to help him to have even more success, because he's going to be able to have a more diverse music, and it's going to touch even more people in terms of public and in terms of enjoying the music that he did. People always liked the one that he used to do before, but also were very keen on listening to the new rhythm that he would so cleverly manage to add to his music as well. And because people were always listening to his music, whatever rhythm it was on, he was someone that people would essentially follow. And whatever he would do, people would take this as an example. He was someone extremely influential, and what he would be doing, people would be doing the same. So it was essentially being an influencer, being before the time of influence, as we talk about it as such nowadays. If he was wearing a specific type of outfit, the next day you would see people wearing the same type of outfit in the street. And one of his manager talks about this actually in one of the interview that he did. I'm going to put a little extract right here.
Franco, c'était un modèle qui était suivi par tout le monde, par la population. C'était un homme qui était adoré par les hommes comme par les femmes. Si bien que si aujourd'hui Franco mettait des babouches, le lendemain tout le monde dans la rue va porter les babouches.
And he also used that creativity and that influence whenever he was doing the actual CD for all his different albums. So he would be using both whatever he thought society was at the time, what people would tend to like in terms of visual, in terms of design. He would be using this, and he would be creating this artwork as well, because it is also very interesting to see the type of different images, the type of design that we used at the time, because this was also part of the influence in how people would perceive him and how they would actually not only support what he was doing, but follow whatever he was doing. And he's talking about this himself right there.
Je suis en train de préparer une maquette pour notre prochain album.
Intitulé
La vie des hommes.
Ça prend beaucoup de temps de préparer une maquette.
Je suis habitué, hein, ça me prend juste 15 à 20 minutes.
Une idée ou
Une idée. Je dois présenter à mes conseillers artistiques. Je commence par des titres comme ici par exemple, le grand maître Luambo Makiadi dans La vie des hommes. Ici, le Tout Puissant OK Jazz. 6 juin 1956, 6 juin 1986, 30 ans de succès. Choc 1986.
But this one thing that he does mention, he really wants to emphasize this, it is the fact that obviously the Tout Puissant OK Jazz, it's more than 25 years of success, hundreds of albums, hundreds of albums with lots of different musicians and different influences. But when Franco officially became the CEO of Tout Puissant OK Jazz, that became an actual organization, a real company, he never stopped being the musician that he was when he was actually 5-year-old, when he was 15-year-old. He never stopped being that musician.
Salima, 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 Moringo Mama Yoka. Sisangaya Yamotema, O Salima,
even if when he took the lead in terms of artistic direction, he never stopped being the musician that he was at heart and what essentially was feeding his soul as well. And it's something very important that he does mention a couple of times, mentioning how, yes, I might be the CEO, but I'm still a guitar player, I'm still that artist. And it was something really, really important for him to mention, which is also why he never stopped going on stage. Until the end of his life, you see him going on stage. Even when he was ill, you could say physically he lost lots of weight, but he was still on stage. He was still, even he was sitting down, but he was still playing the guitar. And it is something really, really important to remember about him, because he was a businessman, but he never stopped being the artist and the guitar player that he was.
Oh Nzambe, osala bomoi bwa moto, moto akoya okuta na malade, mondele pe asali kisi po moto abika.
And there's one last thing, it's a detail, but it's really something that I wanted to mention in terms of the actual, these hair are getting on my nose, I'm telling you, just going to put them backward. There you go. So in terms of influence, there's something that is really, really important to remember at this time in Congo. When the Tout Puissant OK Jazz became this actual company, they had buildings, they had an office, a physical office. And this office was at the Immeuble 1, 2, 3, which was in one of the very business neighborhood in Kinshasa. And at this very specific time, this neighborhood was only with white people, white organization, white companies. There was not a single black-owned organization at this time in Kinshasa, in this specific neighborhood. But when Franco Luambo Makiadi and the Tout Puissant OK Jazz arrived there, it was the very first time that you would say, other than any political man, I'm not talking about politics, I'm really talking about a self-made man who became a businessman. It was the very first time that you would say a black man having offices in this specific neighborhood. And it was really important at this time also because in the eyes of the public, it even emphasized even more the influence and the power that Franco had towards society and the influence that he was having. Because for the very first time, you would see an African man being in this neighborhood and being extremely successful. So throughout his life, Franco has always been using his music to convey messages, to talk about different subjects, about society, about politics, any subject he could refer to, he would do so. There's another subject that he's going to mention in one of his videos, that he's going to mention in one of his songs, and it is the subject of AIDS and this disease that was at the time really overwhelming the country and the continent and the world, and how he tried to make prevention for people to be more careful about this. It was extremely symbolic because at this time, you wouldn't have so many African artists talking about aid and trying to do prevention and all of that, but he did it. He did it in that specific song. And it is also quite important because even if he never officially said that he did have aid himself, he did that song. He tried to make prevention about this specific subject. And unfortunately, on the 12th of October 1989, he passed away in Belgium. And we don't know exactly what happened to him. He was obviously ill, very ill. You could see it physically. But when he passed away, this was an absolute shock for the nation and for Africa because of how this man really became such a powerful ambassador of Congolese and African culture all over the world. People, even if some people disliked him as a person, because obviously he had lots of haters, I can tell you that, they still had respect for what he did in terms of music, in terms of legacy. And when he passed away, it was an absolute shock for everyone. I'm going to put a couple of videos here so that you can see how the nation was mourning this artist because of this influence that he had and the powerful, positive legacy that he left behind. We can still feel his influence, we can still feel his legacy because people still listen to his music nowadays, because how many covers we'll still have every day of Franco's music, because of how even if people don't always know about him, don't always know about his story, they know about the legacy, they know about his songs. And it is with lots of pride that I've been sharing his name and his story with you. For those who've made it until this part of the video and who didn't know about Franco, I really hope that you've enjoyed watching that video, but most importantly, that you will remember the name of Franco Luambo Makiadi, because in my humble opinion, African artists, black artists generally speaking, owe a lot to his legacy, and it is essential for people to remember the name of Franco Luambo Makiadi. I'll see you very soon with the rest of this catch-up series of videos that I'm doing before I actually keep on doing the new videos. I'll see you very soon and I wish you a lovely week.
Oh Mario, Luka ta mwasi yo moko bala. Mario mosalo be kolinga ba mama mobokoli. Basuka yo te. Ah.
Lelo makambo lobi makambo